So we're walking through the book of Jonah together as a church and really enjoyed this book, and we're now back to chapter 1, so this is kind of a start over, but we're going to kind of go through the entire book this morning, so we're not starting over again, but we're going to kind of go through the whole book. So as we've walked through the book of Jonah, what we've seen is that God started out giving to Jonah a clear, unambiguous command. Rise, go to Nineveh. Clear, exactly, he knew exactly what God wanted him to do. And in response to God's clear and unambiguous command, Jonah responded with blatant, willful disobedience. God says, go one way, Jonah gets up and goes the other way. We saw God in his tender mercy and graciousness for Jonah pursue Jonah. And so God wasn't done with Jonah's life. Instead, he pursued him. And we also saw the devastation that Jonah's sin choice caused in the lives of people around him. That is, Jonah chose sinfulness, and the people that were closest to him experienced the consequence or result of his decisions. We saw God expose Jonah's sin, and we watched Jonah remain stubborn. We kind of walked through the end of chapter 1 into chapter 2, and the text implies that Jonah is actually in the belly of the giant sea creature. He's actually in the belly, waiting to die, wishing to die, stubbornly refusing to give up. And then we saw chapter 2 that Jonah's heart is broken, and we saw the response to stubbornness and anger was gratitude and thankfulness. We saw Jonah get to Nineveh. We saw him preach and God repent or change his mind God change his mind. Before Jonah went to Nineveh, we saw God repeat his command to Jonah. So we said God doesn't give you two different commands. The command you start with is the command he's going to tell you again. You don't get to start over. We saw him go to Nineveh. We saw the people respond to Jonah's graceless message, and then we saw God choose not to destroy the city. And we saw how God said, if a people who I've said I'm going to destroy will turn, I'm not going to destroy them. And a people who said I'm going to bless will not obey me, I won't bless them. We saw how God kind of establishes that pattern and says that's what he's going to do. I want to go back to the beginning this morning, and I want to walk through, and I want to deal with Jonah kind of collectively, really the whole book, looking at Jonah's anger. We're going to as we walk through this together, it's really interesting to me as a reader, as a study of the story of Jonah, how angry Jonah is. Now, in American culture, there are certain things that we consider to be, especially American Christian culture, there's certain things that we consider to be very egregious behaviors. Then there's certain things that we tend to kind of just roll our eyes at or chuckle at or treat as relatively trivial. And generally, we treat anger as something that is quite trivial. We treat violence as something that is egregious, but we treat anger as something that is just a normal part of going through life. And it's something that is casual, something that's not really a big deal. Somebody commits a moral sin, we say, oh, that's awful. We see somebody who has issues with anger, and we just say, oh, they'll work it out. So we have this kind of tendency as followers of Jesus to take a pass on anger. And so, as by way of introduction, this is probably going to be a slightly uncomfortable sermon, because we have a tendency to allow this stuff to go, and we don't usually deal with it in church context. And so when you do, one of the things that can happen is you can get to the spot where you go, uh-oh. And I think we'll probably have a little bit of some uh-ohs this morning. So let's kind of walk through, and hopefully I don't make you mad. Oh, I didn't mean that, but that's pretty funny. So anger starts essentially from a blocked goal. It is, you want something. So let's kind of do a little back back up for human experience. We were created in the garden by God perfectly. And in the garden, all of our needs and desires were perfectly met. God gave us decision making, God gave us work to do, God gave us relationship, God gave us provision. Everything that we needed was provided for humanity in the garden. There was intimacy with God, there was intimacy with humans, there was the ability to do work and to see work bring fruition. There was decision making and the ability to choose and act and result. There was all the different parts of us that God designed. All our needs were met completely and perfectly in the garden. And so we're just made. Our need to sleep, our need for intimacy, our need for honor, for communion, for volition, for purpose, for love, for friendship, all of that was perfectly satisfied in the garden. And when sin entered into the world through Adam and Eve's choice, and death by sin, the result is that our needs as humans, our needs are no longer perfectly met, although we still possess them. So our need to be loved is not fully satisfied in our spouse, right? I mean, how many married the perfect spouse? Well, your spouse didn't. So it's not perfectly met. And so we see this in marriages all the time. We see people chasing other relationships because they're just not satisfied with where they're at. We see tensions in homes. How many parented, how many created perfect children? Less raised their hand. Right? So our need for intimacy, how many have the perfect job? Right? You may have a job that you enjoy, but it's not perfect. You work really hard, but you don't always get the product of what it is that you're after. And so we have brokenness. How many of you wake up in the morning less rested than you went to sleep the night before? Right? How many of you either like food or hate food or can't get enough food or get too much food? Right? Our need for appetite is no longer perfectly satisfied. How many of us make decisions and they turned out to be wrong? So we're decision making. Hopefully you didn't raise your hand and but okay, I just went a little ADD moment there. Sorry. So, we make wrong decisions. We have broken relationships. We intend to accomplish something and it doesn't work. We are left with this sense of there is other, there is more. And as a part of that, what we do from early on and in growing is we learn means of relating or means of trying to get our needs and desires met. So we want to be respected, and if we are disrespected, we learn of a way to kind of get the people around us to do what it is that we appreciate. And so it starts really early on, and so you're walking through Walmart, right? And Walmart puts all the stuff you don't want in arm's reach of your kid. And you're walking through Walmart, and your kid says, I want something, and you reject their request. You say, no, and they say, right? This is the common experience of life. And so what I tell you what we did when we were parenting is, not that we're not still, but it's not as hard now. And so we'd go through and they'd say, Dad, can I have this? I'd say, sure. And I'd give it to them. And then we'd walk around and they'd say, can I have that? I said, only one thing at a time. So I'd give them that. And then we get to the checkout and I'd say, well, that belongs to Walmart, so we need to put that back. And we'd put that back. And so I'm sure they hated me at Walmart because there's stuff randomly all over the store that just relocated. And I'm sorry, but that's the only way I figured out how not to kill my children when we went shopping. So we have beliefs about the way to make people respond to us, to appreciate us, to respect us, to love us. And so, a young girl learns very early on that, or maybe learns early on that if she presents herself as a sexual person, she'll get attention, and attention feels good. Her desire to be appreciated and valued is understood in her mind as in her sexuality, and so she dresses in a way, and her parents are like, stop dressing like that. But how she understands life, how she understands her need to be valued and appreciated in her setting is broken. So she dresses a particular way. And you can kind of go through and add a bunch of examples to that. So what happens is, as we're developing and in relationship with other people, when people or circumstances don't measure up to how we believe our needs are supposed to be met, and meeting that need is necessary for us to be okay. That is, we feel our life is going to be undone if we don't get this need met. We respond to that situation in anger. And so let's say a man decides that his wife respecting him is the most important thing to him. He must have the respect of his wife. And so he sets out in his marriage to establish that. And in his understanding of the way respect is given, the way respect is given is when deference is applied. And so that's how he goes through life. And so he's going through life and he tells his wife he would like her to do something. Okay? And she doesn't do it. Okay? So he believes that he is a man, that he is whole, that he is complete, that he's valued and appreciated and respected when someone that is closest to him defers to him. Well, he is going to respond to her in some kind of strategy to get her to defer to him. And the strategy whatever strategy he utilizes is his anger expression. And the strategy can be very broad. It can be from verbal to emotional, to physical, some kind of violence or separation or aggression to somehow force compliance. Or it can be turned inward and say, well, I'm just a terrible human and nobody appreciates me, and kind of go that direction. So when we get to the place, when a person gets to a place where their circumstances don't measure up to how they think they should be treated. Okay? You're driving down the road, right? Really fast, and somebody cuts you off. Anyone have this experience? Okay. Now, how many of you take that as a personal insult? Right? That's related to respect, right? How dare someone disrespect me? So you have to reestablish respect. So how do you reestablish respect? Maybe you flip them the bird. That's a way to reestablish respect. Or you drive them off the road. That's a way that you reestablish respect. Right? Because in your world, in the means of relating, ensuring that respect is established is necessary to make sure that your world works. And so when circumstances don't measure up, and we believe that those circumstances being in line are necessary for us to be well, we respond in some form of anger. And an angry person, or anger, is essentially a manipulation tool that we use to force others around us to meet our needs or our desires on our terms. So anger is a manipulation tool that we use to force people around us to meet our needs on our terms. And so you have a teenager, and the teenager wants to go out till 3 a.m, and you say to them, nothing good happens after 9 o'clock. Wow. Holy cow. Nothing good happens after 9 o'clock in the morning. And the teenager now is going to lose face. She's not going to be appreciated or valued or expected, or he is not going to be appreciated to the degree, and he feels like, well, my life is not going to be the way it should be if I don't have these friends, and I don't want to lose face with these friends, and so they have to select a response, and the response they select is some kind of an angry response. It's necessary to condition my parents and break my parents down so that my parents know that if they don't do what I want them to do, if they don't meet my conditions, I am going to respond, and then they do something. Maybe they brood. Maybe they throw stuff. Maybe they threaten you. Maybe they tell you what a horrible human you are. And maybe they tell you how much they think of you. Or maybe they go and try to help you put a new door jamb in by destroying the door jamb that previously held their door up. I don't know. But they have some kind of response. And so anger is a manipulation response that we use to manage the people around us so that we can get them to do what we want them to do. And so we pull that out whenever we are not getting our way. So there's a bunch of different angry responses. I'm going to read through a number of kind of like a range of angry responses we can have. The one we often think about is a physical attack. So, or physically or breaking or throwing things, or threatening to break and throw things. And so that's an expression of anger. Another expression of anger is habitual irritation. It's an ongoing, just generalized resentment of other people, or just an ongoing of just general frustration. You're just frustrated all the time, and that's anger. An expression of anger is moral superiority, or just living your life from a position that you are better than, or just habitually judging others as beneath you is an expression of anger. An internalized expression of anger is feelings of hopelessness or a continued feeling of frustration. So hopelessness and frustration comes from not being able to effectively control anything. So I can't get the people at work to do what I want them to do, just live in a continual state of frustration. That's an anger expression. How many I got you already? Okay. Passive aggression is a form of anger that seems to evade any form of confrontation, whether verbally they'll use sarcasm. No, I'm not preaching about the use of sarcasm, but sarcasm, you understand that sarcasm can be a form of anger, an angry expression. If you're using it to win a point or to belittle, then sarcasm is an expression of anger. Pointed silence or veiled mockery are expressions of anger. Chronic procrastination, or I wrote down sandbagging. You say, hey, let's go, and they're just, it's just they're always, it's just the expression of anger. Revenge and stubbornness, feelings of hopelessness, unworth, humiliation, or feeling ashamed are self-anger. Shouting, threats, ridicule, sarcasm, intense blaming, or extreme criticism. Or being very quick to be upset with a perceived annoyance, whether large or small, or maintaining a sense of hatred or maintaining a sense of bitterness. These are expressions of anger that are learned. These are expressions of anger that are learned sinful strategies implemented to force others to act in a way we believe will get our needs and longings met. So they're learned. So, husband comes home, he's late, he didn't call, did anything, he walks in the door, and hi honey, I'm home, and he gets, shh, I'm trying the silent treatment and you're talking. He gets, hello? What? Here we go. It's just anger. It's just a form of anger. It's just anger. You didn't get what you wanted. And you're conditioning him to know that if he doesn't perform in a way that is consistent with what you want, you're going to respond to him. You tap your wife on the shoulder and she says, I'm sleepy. And you say, don't answer. So the next day, you intentionally do stuff that you know she doesn't like. What is that? It's a manipulative strategy based on anger in order to try to get her to perform in a particular way to make you feel whole. Right? So we have all of these kind of different analogies that we can make that are simply expressions of anger. The person that you can't forgive is really your anger. The point that you can't give in is just your anger. The fact that you are right all the time and everyone else is wrong all the time is just anger. The fact that you don't get along with anybody is just anger. The fact that the whole world is against you is just anger. The fact that your marriage is breaking down is likely connected to one or two angry people who refuse to deal with it. Everyone else was saying, "Oh my," and you came up with. So let's look at Jonah. No. Like, whose fault is the anger? Guy comes home late from work, didn't call his wife. What has he done wrong? He didn't respect his wife. That's his sin, right? He should not do that. He should love his wife and respect her enough to care for her and call her, correct? It's his sin. He's wrong. His wife walks in, gets silent treatment. She gets a big harumph. His dinner is in the garbage disposal, and here we go. Whose fault is that? It's hers. It's hers. It's her sin. We'll talk about that a little bit more in a second. Jonah has a belief, and I've talked about this repeatedly, has a belief about the nature of the reality that he wants. He believes his life will be better if Nineveh is destroyed. Specifically, he wants something that is outside his power to control. He wants to control the actions of God. We saw in chapter 4 that he says, "God, I knew that if I went and preached, that you wouldn't kill him, so I didn't want to go." So he's trying to manage and control the actions of God. He wants something outside of his control. He's trying to manage God. And he believes his life will be better if Nineveh is destroyed. Jonah chapter 1, verse 2. God says, "Arise, go to that great city and call out against it, for evil has come up against me." But Jonah rose and fled to Tarshish. The first response of anger is he refuses a reasonable request. And this reasonable request is either driven by hatred or some sense of moral superiority. That is, he wants them dead or he thinks them not worthy of life. And so he is refusing a reasonable request. And the reasonable request is refused out of anger. We get this. "Honey, would you pick up something on the way home?" "Oh, I said to pick up." It's a reasonable request. "Hey, could you not play music so loud so early in the morning?" It is a reasonable request. It's reasonable. And he responds to that in anger. He's either moral superiority or hatred. In verse 3, but he rose and fled to Tarshish. Here his anger is avoidance of a reasonable discussion. He is unwilling to change his mind, and so having an interaction, he avoids that interaction because he is stubborn in his position. He knows what he wants, and he's unwilling to give up his spot. And so because he's unwilling to give up his position, he refuses to even enter into any form of dialogue. Verse 5. Then the mariners were afraid, and he cried out to their God, and they hurled their cargo that was in the ship in the sea to lighten it for them, because Jonah had gone into the inner part of the ship and laid down and was fast asleep. He ignores how his actions are affecting others. So he has his position. He knows what he wants. I will have a world without Nineveh. And so he ignores how his actions are affecting others. This is the person who knows they can't yell and scream, but yells and screams. Who knows how their actions are helping others, but instead, driven from anger, are demanding that others do what they want them to do. Verse 7, refuses to accept responsibility for their actions. And they said to him, "Come, let us cast lots that we may know on whose account this evil had come upon us." So he refuses to accept responsibility. They're having to go an extra mile to find out what is wrong. This is the person who says, "I wouldn't have acted this way if you hadn't." Right? Why are you so upset? Because you. right? No. No. Why are you so upset? Because I have an evil, wicked heart. How many started a sentence like that before? Right? So Jonah is refusing to accept personal responsibility. He's deferring to the others. He's allowing the others to go through this whole charade to figure out whether or not who's responsible, when he knows full well the entirety of the storm is a consequence of his own sinfulness. Verse 12. He said to them, "Pick me up and hurl me into the sea, that the sea may be quiet down, for I know it is because of me that this great tempest has come upon you." In verse 12, he expects others to act to solve his problem. Chapter 2, verse 1, then Jonah prayed. Remember, I told you that in the Hebrew, you can tell a story in which you can indicate that the parts of the story are happening in order, and they put that marker in the language for chapter 2 and verse 1 to tell you that chapter 2, verse 1 happens immediately after the end of the story in chapter 1. So the last thing that happens in chapter 1 is Jonah is in the belly of the fish or the giant sea creature for some portion of 3 days and 3 nights. And after this some portion of 3 days and 3 nights, then Jonah prays. And so he is stubborn, refusing to give in. Chapter 3, verse 4. And Jonah began to cry, going a day's journey, and he called out, "Yet 40 days, Nineveh will be overthrown." He has a graceless message. Chapter 4, verse 1 and 2. He justifies his disproportionately heavy response. Chapter 4, verse 1, but it displeased Jonah exceedingly. In other words, he was disproportionately angry for the situation. Like the situation called for a response from him, and his response is way out of line. Okay? He is disproportionately angry, and he was angry. And he prayed to the Lord and said, "O Lord, is not this what I said when I was yet in my country? That is why I made haste to flee to Tarshish, for I knew that you're gracious and merciful, slow to anger and abounding in steadfast love and relenting from disaster." And so he's a disproportionate response for the situation. So, like, we see this in young people. "No, you can't stay out till 3 o'clock in the morning." "I hate you. I wish I was never born." Throw stuff, kill people, run away. What? It's just a stupid party, and your friends aren't that bright anyway. So, like, you're disproportionate. You're disproportionately, even disproportionate response. It's much larger reaction than what the current situation calls for, and that's a form of anger. Then chapter 4, verse 3, he over-dramatizes his desire. Again, he has a desire for these people to be killed. He has a goal. He wants them to die. And verse 3 over-dramatizes his desire. "Therefore, O God, please take my life, for it is better for me to die than to live. I would rather die." Like, really? Death is better than the revival? Like, really? Dying? If we can't go to see my parents next weekend, I don't even know why we're married. Really? Divorce over parents? Really? I'm going to run away from home if you don't. Vagabond over 2 hours of sleep. Like, we have these disproportionate responses. And I've told you, I had a guy, I've told you the story before. He was he had these massively angry, physically violent responses to the ridiculous behaviors of his wife. He once punched his wife in the mouth for not wearing her retainer, her brace his retainer to church one Sunday because he wanted her teeth to be straight. So he punches her in the face over a retainer. Months in jail, right? And he's arguing with me with a straight face like I'm like, well, duh, she should have had her retainer in. And I said, go back to jail. I did not. So it's interesting about this Jonah 4:3. This is an anger tactic designed to entice the other to act. This is an anger tactic designed to entice the other to act. I want you to kill me. Oh, Jonah, I don't want you to feel bad. I'll kill him so you feel better. It's a tactic designed to manipulate the other person into responding in a way that you want them to react. So a teen stamps the door or slams the door or won't talk. A wife huffs around or is angry and won't interact. It's just expresses a disproportionate disapproval. A husband disengages or gets louder or bigger or stronger or puffs himself up. All of these are disproportionate tactics designed to get the other person to know, if you don't do what I want you to do in order for me to feel right about my world and myself, I'm going to do this. You don't like this, and so don't do what I disapprove of. Verse 5, Jonah went out of the city and sat in the east of the city and made a booth for himself there, and he sat under it in the shade till he should see what had become of the city. He created a prove-it moment and forced a confrontation. Then verse 9, he has misplaced city. And I'll talk about what happens in this whole section next week. But in verse 9, God had built a plant. The plant died. So God built a plant because it was hot. God built a plant. It grew really fast. He liked the plant because it gave him shade. Then God sent a worm, killed the plant. The plant died. And then Jonah comes to the end of that and he says, I want to die because the plant died. And God said to Jonah, do you do well to be angry for the plant? So he's so mad because the plant died, he wants to die himself. And he says, yes, I do well to be angry enough to die. So he now has got himself, he has misplaced pity. He feels badly for the wrong thing. Here's this whole nation of people that could die. He doesn't feel bad for them. Instead, he feels bad for the vegetation that he wanted, all because he's not getting his way. This all comes back to the initial point in which he said, I want Nineveh to be destroyed, and now he has disproportionate pity on something in someone else. He has it in the wrong place. He has misplaced compassion out of his anger. And then in verse 10 and 11, he is unable to experience proper compassion. He is unable to experience proper compassion. The Lord said to him, you pity the plant for which you did not labor, nor did you make it grow, which came into being in the night and perished in the night. And shouldn't I pity Nineveh, that great city has 120,000 little children? He has misplaced pity. He's unable to experience proper compassion. He can only see the world through the lens of his desire to manipulate people around him, to satisfy him, to be the way he wants it to be. All right, here we go. That was point 1, and I got 3 points and 1 minute and 20 seconds. And so, that was actually point 2. So, that's the problem. What's the answer? The answer is simple but remarkably complex. And the answer will take the rest of your life to pursue. Faith is the antidote to anger. Anger is a particular faith expression, if you ever thought about it this way. But anger is a particular is principally, a faith expression. That is, we're saying, God, who you say I am is not enough. how you define me as uniquely created by you with the ability to do good, desiring to be in relationship with me through Christ, that you have made me this way is not enough. That you, the creator of the universe, value me is not enough. I need, and I'll point my fingers to the people around me or whoever, I need this person, I need my spouse, I need them to value me in a particular way, and the way they value me, and then we make up a little list of learned behaviors, the way they value me is this. The way they value me is when I call on the cell phone, they pick it up. And if they don't pick up after three calls, then I know that I am not valued properly, and I'm going to let them have it, that I'm paying for that stupid cell phone, and how dare you not... Have I the only one that had this conversation in my head? Right? So we're saying, God, who you say I am is not enough. Anger is principally a faith expression. We say, God, what you have given to me is not enough. God, what you have provided for me both physically and emotionally and spiritually is not enough. I must have more, or I must have other. That's essentially what's going on. When you are angry, and you are expressing that anger in a manipulative way. How was your day? You're principally making a faith statement. And your faith statement is simply this: God, you're not enough. What you say isn't right, isn't true, isn't complete. I'm not well. I need more than you. And the resolution also of anger also requires faith. Do you know that, men, you are not defined by your wife? Do you know that? And you are not defined as a man by your wife's attraction to you. You are not defined as a man by her willingness to be with you intimately. You are not defined by how much money you make. You're not defined by how smart you appear or do not appear to be. You are defined principally by the Creator God who designed you and made you who you are and is giving you everything you need to be whole in a broken world. So whether or not your wife is exactly who, she's exactly God to you, is irrelevant if by faith you accept that everything you need has been provided for you in Him. So you don't have to manipulate her, because she doesn't have to perform for you to be okay. Yeah? Awkward. Faith requires, the resolution to anger requires faith. Faith in a God who said, I will never leave you. I will never forsake you. So that if we are alone, we are not lost and undone and broken, because there is a God who is present always. The resolution requires faith in the power of God to prevail over the broken circumstances of our life, the sovereignty of God in the affairs of men, and the definition that we get from God in our identity. Faith resolves anger when we are absolutely wholly secure in our in the eternal declaration of God, that God said, having accepted Christ, we are eternally adopted into His family. That adoption happens by faith in the finished work of Jesus Christ. Jesus came, lived, and died. Jesus came and lived and died to die on the cross for our sin, for your sin, for my sin, our sin which alienates us from God. Jesus came, lived, and died for our sin, was buried, and rose again, conquering death and hell, and offers to you and to me a relationship with God by faith in the finished work of Jesus Christ on the cross. So we can be accepted by God, not because we perform, but because we by faith have accepted His gift of salvation. It is when we recognize by faith that our lives are whole, because we are in Christ, we are able to respond well to others. It is when we realize not getting our vision of the future or our needs met is not capable of undoing us. We are then able to respond in forgiveness and kindness. The resolution to anger is principally a faith statement also. We believe the gospel. We believe his provision is enough. We believe his definition of who we are is enough. And we believe that we don't need any more. It is when we take God's definition of who we are and what he has provided for us as enough that we are able to relearn how to respond when we don't get our desires or needs met in the way that we want. It's when we accept by faith that what God says about us, that what he has provided to us is enough, that we're able to relearn how we act and react to others when they don't respond to us in the way that we determine is necessary. So, welcome to this lifelong journey of chasing anger through faith. Guys, if you're mad at your wife, you have a God problem, not a wife problem. Ladies, if you can't stand your husband, you have a God problem, not a husband problem. And students, if your parents are the worst in the world, you don't have a parent problem. You have a God problem. Now, by way of caveat, if someone is physically or sexually abusing you, that's not what we are talking about this morning. That's a separate, completely different topic that you and I could have a discussion on individually. We're talking about just the give and take of normal relationships. And in the breakdown in normal relationships that are based in some form of manipulative behavior, we have a system of belief that says, my world will not be okay unless I can get God or others to act the way I require them to be. And if they don't, I'm going to. And we have different tools in our tool belt that we put out. But principally, when we accept the gospel as truth, the word of God as truth, God's definition of himself and his definition of us as true, then we are able to act right in the midst of others' foolishness. So their sin does not define us, does not become us. And we are able to see our journey as principally a faith journey where we are accepting what God says about us. Some of us today are going to have to wrestle with this because we have lived our whole lives with this strategy. Like we know how to get other people to do what we want them to do, and releasing them from that expectation is just foreign to anything that we think about. Like, I don't even understand that. You're going to have to go back and look at it. Now, as we've walked through this story of Jonah, one of the things that we've come through is like, I don't want to be like Jonah. Jonah was an angry man. Fundamentally, he's an angry man. And it plays out, and we get to see his story. When we get together next Sunday morning, we're going to pick up in chapter 4. We're actually going to finish Jonah next Sunday morning. It's like 7 weeks and 4 chapters, so I'm pretty happy for that. And although I promised 8, but I can't get there. So we're going to finish up Jonah next Sunday morning. We're going to look at his inability to have compassion. We're going to kind of unpack God's compassion, and we're going to look at what I think is God's sarcasm. And I think God makes a super sarcastic comment here, and so I can't help but love sarcasm. So we'll bring that out when we pack it, we'll unpack that next Sunday morning. April the 7th, we are going to make a pretty major change in our format on Sunday mornings. So April the 7th, we're going to go to 2 Sunday morning services. And so for those of you who are sitting next to someone today and thinking, I wish you were farther away from me, then we're going to solve that next on April the 7th. And our times are going to be, we may change these down the road a little bit. We're going to start with 9 o'clock and 10:45. And for those of you who are wondering about Bible studies, what we will do is run Bible studies during both preaching hours. And so your Bible study class will be assigned an hour, either the 9 o'clock hour or the 10:45 hour. And so you would just attend the opposite service. We're still looking for more people to do the attend one, serve one. And I'll send you another link. If you are already serving, I'm not going to presume that you're going to continue. So if you're already involved in some way, just click that link and say that you would be willing to serve in the attend one, serve one, which is really how we're going to be able to staff this, is if our church people do that. So we'll have some special things coming in April. It's a couple of weeks before Easter to help us get ready for the transition. It's going to start, did I say November? No, okay. April the 7th. Okay. All right. God, thanks for our chance to be together this morning.